Reverend Eileen come up and offer her talk on Who I Am Reflects How I Am. Welcome.
Thank you.
Who I Am Reflects How I Am. Danny, I love that song. All week long, I kept thinking, I gotta call Danny. I gotta call Danny. I have an 11-year-old. I have to call Danny. I have to call Danny. I have an 11-year-old. I was exhausted. So he picked the perfect song. And if you don't have Danny's CDs, we have them here. And if you don't have a CD player, you can actually download his songs on CD Baby and purchase them there. So that's where I have them, and they're downloaded onto my phone so I can listen to Danny anytime I want. So I highly recommend that because, as you know, as we move through life, right? What we hear over and over and over again starts to become our reality. What we hear over and over and over again starts to become our reality. Isn't that interesting? So if I'm hearing positive, uplifting music, guess what my reality becomes? Positive and uplifting, right? Right? So this month we've been exploring the ideas that we are whole no matter what. Not whole once we've fixed ourselves. We talked about that last week, right? Not whole once we've healed everything, not whole once we become the version of ourselves we think that we're supposed to be. We're whole now, exactly as we are, even with our imperfections or our perceived imperfections. Because in truth, we are whole, perfect, and complete just as we are. Oops, our audio went out again, but because this is my talk, I can share with you what I said. So don't look, because my lips will not match what you see on the screen. This month, we've been exploring the idea that we are whole no matter what. Not whole once we've fixed ourselves, not whole once we've healed every wound, not whole once we've become the version of ourselves we imagine we ought to be. We are whole now, exactly as we are, even while we continue growing. This week I've been asking myself this question: what would my life be like if I was authentically myself in every relationship? It's an interesting question because all of life is a relationship. Certainly our relationships with family and friends, our relationship with strangers, with our pets, our relationship with the grocery clerk, and our relationship with ourselves. Ultimately, our relationship with the divine. What I've discovered over the past few weeks is that every relationship becomes a mirror. They don't simply show us who other people are, they reveal who we are. This past week, my 11-year-old niece, Addie, has been visiting me. And before she arrived, I spent 2 weeks caring for their family dog, Poppy, in addition to my own dog and my 2 cats. And by the time Addie got here, my house had become a lively little adventure. Dogs needing walks, cats needing protection from an overly enthusiastic dog, meals, laundry, activities, schedules, questions, lots and lots of questions. Life was wonderfully full. And one of the greatest gifts of having an 11-year-old around is that you begin seeing your own community through fresh eyes. We went to the Fling Creek Circus, and now I've been to the circus, I've driven by it countless times, but watching Addie experience it for the first time reminded me how extraordinary, ordinary things can become when viewed with wonder. She laughed, she gasped, she clapped with complete abandon, or maybe that was me. See, wonder is contagious. We also took an improv class together. If you've ever taken improv, you know that the first rule is yes and. You don't argue with what your scene partner gives you. You don't wish the scene were different. You accept what is here and then you create from it. I found myself thinking that might be one of the greatest spiritual practices there is. Life says, here's what today looks like, and we respond, yes, and. Not because we always like what's happening, but because resisting reality keeps us from participating with it fully. Anybody ever have those days where you feel like you're pushing the river? Yeah. Go with the flow. Go with the flow. So one day we're walking Finn here in town. I ran into a friend of mine and her 12-year-old daughter. We were going to go and take Finn for a walk out in nature with another friend. And Addie, I introduced Addie to Aria and Aria to Addie. And then suddenly they were best friends. My friend went, yeah, take my daughter. I'm like, great, we'll be back in an hour. What happened was, in moments, they were laughing together. They were speaking what can only be described as preteen language, right? One's from here, one's from Silicon Valley, but they had a language. They had been watching the same YouTube videos and watching the same TikTok videos, and they had this whole conversation, and we're talking about musicians, and they had never met before. It was like they were best friends. And I thought, when do we forget how to do that? At what point do we forget that the person that we meet on the street could be our very best friend? Even if it's just for an hour. Even if it's just for an hour. See, they had no concerns about whether they would be accepted. They didn't have any masks on. Just curiosity, just openness, just connection. It was really fabulous to watch. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. I ended up playing with the dog at the picnic area that we walked out to because these two were off just talking. There was no interrupting them. Then we came back into town and the local teenager said, oh, I love this thrift shop over here. We've got to go. They were closed already, but we walked into the store next door to it. I can't think of the name, but it'll come to me in a minute. Sherwood. These two girls were having the best time, smelling all of the candles, talking about them. And I looked at my watch and I went, it's 5:20. And I looked at the clerk and said, what time do you close? She goes, oh, 5 o'clock. I went, I'm so sorry, you could have kicked us out of here. She said, no, I love watching these two shop together. They're enjoying it. They're having the full experience of smelling and touching and feeling and comparing and talking to each other about it. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. That's really, really cool. Now, I want to share a reading from Brian Plotchka. This is really cool. He says, why do we nag and criticize ourselves? Perfection is one reason. We expect ourselves to be perfect, and when we aren't, we shame ourselves. We dig trenches of negativity that tell us we're bad, flawed, and broken. Driving ourselves to achieve isn't wrong. It allows us to pursue our dreams. But that drive becomes imbalanced when it tilts into never good enough attitude. What if, when we catch ourselves launching a negativity attack against ourselves, we stopped and instead named one good quality we possess? Perfectly human means we will make mistakes. And when we do, we'll admit them. We'll learn from them and love ourselves anyway. When we make peace with our internal wars and accept all parts of ourselves without judgment, we create more space for God to love us, for us to love ourselves, and then become multipliers of unconditional love for others. I love that phrase, perfectly human. Perfectly human. Because if I'm honest, I sometimes put too much energy into being perfectly spiritual than perfectly human. And maybe you do too. Somewhere along the way, we begin believing that spirituality means never becoming frustrated. Do you remember that? In the days of early religious science, it was a lot of spiritual bypass. A lot of, oh, everything's fine when actually your house is falling apart around you, right? Never becoming tired, never feeling overwhelmed, never losing patience, never having grief surprise us. No, none of that happened. But perhaps That's never been the invitation. Perhaps the invitation is simply to become more authentic, to become more compassionate with ourselves. Now, that reading, it kind of stayed with me all week. Because while I was taking care of dogs and entertaining an 11-year-old, I wasn't only paying attention to what I was doing, I was paying attention to who I was being. And that's a very different question. So I kept asking myself these questions. Have I given myself enough time to pause? Have I meditated? Ooh, did I pray? Have I taken a breath before responding? Ooh, that's tough with an 11-year-old that's taking there all the time. Or have I simply been reacting to the next thing that needed my attention? That's what happens when you're really busy, right? We're reacting to the next thing that needs our attention. But the science of mind reminds us that consciousness always precedes experience. Consciousness always precedes experience. Who we are on the inside eventually becomes how we show up on the outside, but we have to take care of our spiritual needs first. If who we are on the inside is ugly and everything's falling apart, what's going to show up on the outside? Ugly, everything's falling apart. Or telling other people that they are what we're experiencing on the inside, right? So if I'm grounded, people experience groundedness. If I'm anxious, they experience anxiety. If I'm peaceful, those around me experience peace. See, the inner life always expresses itself in our relationships. Now, I'm going to be honest. Don't tell anyone. There were moments this week when frustration showed up. Nothing dramatic, just ordinary human moments. You know, those moments where we just wanted 10 minutes of quiet, right? Or moments where I realized my meditation cushion had been waiting for me all day. Just needed to go sit and meditate. Moments when everyone needed something at the same exact time. The cat, the dog, the kid, the internet, the phone was ringing off the hook. It was just, now those weren't failures. They were invitations to notice, to pause, to reflect, and to begin again, right? That's spiritual practice, not perfection, presence. Being fully present. And then something happened that reminded me how quickly life can change. I was shopping over here with Addie and this other girl. They're laughing and they're trying on clothes and they're talking nonstop. And then a song came on over the music that was being played in the store. I don't even remember what song it was. I found myself singing along to it, and then grief showed up. I took a deep breath and went, okay, grief, not now. Not now, because I was responsible for the children of 2 different families in that moment. Not now, because I couldn't walk outside the store, walk across the street, get in my car, drive around the corner and cry. Not now, grief. Not now, because Addie knows what I've been through, but this other kid doesn't. I don't want to freak her out, right? So I took a breath and another. And I reminded myself that grief wasn't interrupting the moment. Grief was a part of the moment, right? Now, the reading says, don't stop says, stop the inner war, pick up instead of the plowshare of self-acceptance. But in this case, there was no war to fight. I wasn't grieving incorrectly. I wasn't failing spiritually. I was simply being perfectly human. And isn't that what authenticity really is? Not expressing every feeling the instant we have it, but honoring what is true while responding with wisdom. That's maturity. That's compassion. That is spiritual practice. Now, Ernest Holmes beautifully echoes the reading from earlier when he writes, humanity and divinity will be identical when we recognize divinity in humanity. Humanity and divinity will be identical when we recognize divinity in humanity. We must learn to see through the apparent, to realize at the center of every person's soul, God is enthroned. Compassion and caring are the ties that bind us together in mutual understanding and in the unified attempt to uncover the divinity in each other. Now, notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say that we'll recognize divinity after we become perfect. He says that we recognize divinity in our humanity, exactly where we are, exactly as we are. I have a ministerial buddy of mine, Jane Beach. Jane's retired now, but Jane would say, this is the human experience. We get to have the human experience. The grief is a human experience. Okay, but what's the truth of who you are? What's the truth of who you are? That truth kept revealing itself all week long because everywhere Addie and I went, well, almost, I ran into people that I knew. Or I saw people that I recognized. One, I couldn't figure out where I recognized her from yesterday. And I realized I see her in the Indivisible Mendocino pictures every week. Oh yeah, that's where I recognize her from. So after a few days with me, Addie said, you know everyone. No, I don't. She says, Auntie, you can't go 20 steps without seeing somebody you don't know. She had just said that at the 4th of July parade, and I saw Danny. She said, see, I told you. And I said, yeah, but Danny's special. Right? I walked by the fire, as we were leaving, I walked by the fire trucks, and there's the captain of the Mendocino Police Fire Department, who I hadn't seen in a while. And he's like, hey, Eileen. And I walked over and gave him a great big hug. And she said, seriously, Auntie, everyone? I know him because of his dog in the dog park. Right? That's how I know him. No matter where we went, at the grocery store, walking around here, at the circus, I saw someone I knew, and then someone else saw me and came and said hello. Everywhere we went, there was another smile, another conversation, another hug, right? Now, the day before yesterday, my UPS driver delivered a package, and he carried it inside for me. And then he met my family. Gave me a great big hug. Now he knows my aunt who worked at UPS Healthcare for many years. So, you know, he's like friend of the family kind of guy. I had never met my brother. He comes in and he gives me this great big bear hug. And he says, God, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. And I said, yeah, I missed you when you were on vacation. And he left to finish his route. And Addie went, did the UPS driver just come in the house and give you a hug? Yeah. She said, what kind of place is this? I said, a place filled with love and compassion. This is what it's like when you're in a small town. And her mom kept repeating to her, Addie, this is what you're like, what life is like when you're in a small town. I explained to her that in San Jose, there's 1 point, I don't know, number of people, 1 million people in San Jose. She went, really? I said, yeah, when you pull in, and I showed her what the population sign looks like. And she started reading them as we were going up and down the coast. 140 some odd people in Albion? Oh. 403 people in Little River? Yeah, Addie. I said, you have more kids in your school than that. Oh, yeah. But see, those moments where we run into each other, that reminds us that we don't walk this path alone. Sometimes spirituality looks like meditation. Sometimes it looks like the UPS driver taking a couple of extra minutes to help you carry your box in and giving you a great big hug. Sometimes it's walking through the crowd at the 4th of July parade and running into Candace. Right? It's a community. What it looks like is a community quietly caring one another. We support each other, we love each other, we show up for each other, and we acknowledge each other. That's what it's about. So, Thursday, Addie's parents showed up to collect her, to spend a couple of days on the coast to relax a little bit, and her face completely shifted. When we pulled in, she kept asking me, where are my parents? Where are my parents? Like, when are they? Can you call them? I say, honey, they're driving out 128. There's no cell coverage. They'll get here as soon as they can. We pulled up and she shrieked when she saw their car in the driveway. She was so excited. I could barely get the car stopped. She was out running across the yard, jumping into her mother's arms. Where's daddy? Where's daddy? Like this little kid. Like a little kid. I mean, she's a little kid, but she's like a little kid. And she was so excited to see them. Big smile on her face, and then started telling them story after story after story about what she'd been doing for the last 7 days. And I thought, wow. See, she didn't hesitate to move towards love. She ran towards it. She ran towards love. She didn't calculate whether it was safe enough. Is there a rock in her way? She just took off. They simply run. And what if we trusted life that way? What if we trusted love enough to move towards it instead of away from it? Joan Chittister writes, to be whole ourselves, we must make the extra effort it requires to understand what is happening to the world. Then we must make the effort to change our own lives in ways that begin to reverse the damage. Make the effort it requires to understand what is happening to the world, and then make the effort to change our own lives in ways that begin to reverse the damage of what's happening in the world. I think that work begins exactly where today's reading began, by ending the war within ourselves, by laying down perfectionism and by embracing authenticity, right? By recognizing that being whole doesn't mean that we never feel grief. It doesn't mean never getting tired. It doesn't mean never becoming frustrated. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means that all of those experiences belong. Joy belongs. Wonder belongs. Exhaustion belongs. Grief belongs. Responsibility belongs. And love belongs. See, nothing excludes us from our wholeness. Everything becomes a part of it. Ernest Holmes says, since God does not manifest itself alike in every person, being unique in each, no person need feel out of place in the universe in which they live. There is a right something for each one to do. He's saying that we don't have to all be alike. And that leads us to our practice this week, which is what is mine to do? So for me, it's simple. It's making space again. Making space to meditate, making space to pray, making space to breathe before responding, right? It's allowing myself to receive all the love from all the sources and to give as much as I receive, if not more. It's saying yes to hugs, yes to conversations, yes to community, and yes to wonder. And it's trusting that whatever is coming this week, I can meet it authentically. Not perfectly, but honestly. So in this week, I invite you to notice your own relationships, right? Not necessarily the ones that are at home, but all of your relationships. And notice when you feel completely yourself. And then notice when you start to put that mask on. Notice what happens in your body when you do that. It's a really interesting experience. So when we stop trying to become perfect, when we become willing to be perfectly human, we make it safer for everyone else around us to do the same. And perhaps that's how the world changes. One authentic relationship at a time. One compassionate conversation. One honest moment. One smile. One hug. One perfectly human being at a time. And may we honor both the humanity and the divinity in everyone we meet. And may we never forget that they begin by honoring that in themselves as well. Let's pray, shall we? Taking a deep breath. Knowing that there is one source, one power, one presence. We have declared it here in this space. Knowing that it is in, through, and around each and every one of us. It is beyond these walls. It is beyond this building. It is beyond what we can see. It is all that there is. Everywhere, all the time. And we are connected with that source. We are connected to that source. We are a part of it, which means that we are divine, even in our humanness. So as we accept that, as we claim that, as we honor that part of us, we do so knowing that all of our needs are met. That every need that we have, every healing is already done in the mind of God. Every source of abundance is already delivered in the mind of God. We know that love is already showing up because it is the divine. There's no way we can stop these gifts that are our divine birthright. All we need to do is slow down, take a breath, and recognize them. And as we do so this week, we do so recognizing it first within ourselves and then in everyone we meet this week, every phone call we make, every email we send, every time we look at someone else or notice someone else in our space, we recognize the divine within them. The divinity in me recognizes the divinity in you. And when we do that, we see the perfection, we see the power, we see the presence, and we can celebrate it. And so as we take our steps through our week, we do that, celebrating the divinity in all life. Honoring all of it with compassion and gentleness, smiles and hugs, conversations, empathy. And we know that we are never alone. So I anchor this prayer, I anchor it with a gratitude for knowing the truth of who we are, gratitude in knowing the truth of everyone and everything that I come in contact with. That divinity is there. And when I say thank you, Spirit, I really mean it. I say thank you, Spirit, for all the gifts. And I simply release this prayer by anchoring it with 3 simple words. And if you would like to anchor it with me, let's do so now by saying, and so it is. Blessed be.